On a blustery April morning in 1971, Gabe and I took the subway from his apartment on East 13th Street to the municipal building on Worth Street, where we borrowed a witness and got married. I was 22 and Gabe was 50. We didn't elope. We weren't young enough once you averaged out our ages. Also, we weren't convinced of each other in the headlong way that word implies. We got up and got married because the license we'd applied for 1 month earlier was about to expire, and whatever the consequences were of letting that happen were too frightening for either of us to consider. I can only think to compare my own state of mind that morning to the thick, druggy climate of certain dreams, or to the reputed mind clutch of a wacky religious cult, or maybe just to fate. Love played a part, but then it usually does. The first person I told was my Uncle Ben. He was the most important person in my life back then. My uncle had been a mother and a father to me ever since I came to New York to live with him when I was 14. He was furious. I couldn't remember my uncle ever being so angry with me. It was true that he had never liked Gabe, but his anger wounded and confused me. I couldn't bear not having his blessing. We didn't speak for weeks. One day I got a call at work, and it was him. Usually Ben was a joker on the phone, pretending to be a cheesy Hollywood producer or a Bogart from Casablanca. I was working in the Costume Institute of the Met, sharing an office with another assistant. I didn't like to take personal calls there. This time there was no joking. He was formal and polite. "How are you, Isabel?" "Fine, thank you. How are you?" "Will you get out your calendar? I would very much like your assistance on a gig I have in a few weeks. It's a weekend, so it won't interfere with your job." My uncle supported himself with his photography, but he was becoming more of a street photographer, and some of the images he shot were beginning to be shown in galleries. He still lived in Washington Mews in the little yellow house, and though a number of women had cycled through his life, he remained unmarried and alone. At 22, I hadn't begun to fully appreciate all he'd willingly given up to be a parent to me. I got out my calendar. The gig was the circus, opening night. Ben had been hired to shoot the wire walker. I said I'd come. We met at Madison Square Garden an hour before showtime and made our way to the top tier of seats. Once up there, we had to crouch to wend our way single file through a narrow crawl space behind the seats to the spot he'd selected, level with the wire. We were each loaded down with camera equipment, and though conversation was difficult, Ben was telling me a story about a Romanian trapeze artist with hair to her waist who was currently the source of some turmoil in his romantic life. He wasn't complaining. "A Romanian lady expects a man to suffer for her," he said matter-of-factly. "It's like an art." "Don't say lady," I replied. I hated that word. I had strong opinions on all kinds of things then, most of them Gabe's. Uncle Ben's plan was to emerge level with the high wire, on the side directly opposite the wire walker's entrance. He intended to shoot the performer from the front as he made his way toward us. This particular artist was famous for working without a net. Uncle Ben used to say if I wanted to learn photography, I had to learn how to schlep first. My knees hurt. I really wanted a cigarette. I hadn't thought about learning photography in a long time. "Are you sure we're on the right side?" I said when we arrived at the spot he had in mind. My uncle didn't answer. He knew that my question was really a complaint disguised as a question, and therefore rhetorical. I didn't have words for the complaint. I didn't even like the circus. "This should be about right. Careful when you put down that bag with the lenses," he said. He was breathing pretty fast himself. Sometimes when I looked at his curly, going gray hair and the foolish beard he grew now and then, when I listened to him go on, Sinatra and Basie, Graham Greene, the miserable Russians, and how the guitar had ruined everything, I forgot he was my dead mother's brother, forgot what a crush I'd had on him when I was 14. He seemed not like a father exactly, and not like a former lover, but like some entity composed of parts of both those things, like family. When we had settled ourselves in the equipment, I scooched close to an opening and looked down. We were right where he said we'd be, at the tippy top of the still empty stadium. Down below, tiny acrobats and itsy-bitsy elephants went about their otherworldly business. I pulled the sandwiches and chips we'd brought with us from the bag, then dug both our packs of cigarettes out of another bag. It was almost like old times. We each lit up as we peeled the paper wrap off the sandwiches. We had 30 minutes before showtime to set up, hunker down in the dark, and wait. Photography is all about preparation, Ben liked to say, then praying you got something you never planned for. The food and nicotine revived me. Back then, the garden was only a few years old. It has that wonderful new stadium smell, I joked. I still thought we might find our way back to the easy rhythms we had created with each other. Ha, you have your mother's sense of humor, he said. She could be a pretty funny customer, reckless though. I heard an edge in his voice. What's that supposed to mean, I said. At that point in my life, an entire day could go by when I didn't think about my mother at all. Boy crazy, mostly. She got bored easily. Did you know she wanted to be a radio journalist? And then, out of nowhere, a windfall of information. My mother died when she was exactly my age. I was a baby. I felt amazed by how little I knew about her. I could still be poleaxed by some new tidbit. Your grandfather wouldn't send her to college, though. He didn't think girls needed educating. Huh. I added this fresh fact to the pile of puzzle pieces I had collected over the years. So far, it didn't have an obvious place to fit. You didn't go to college either, I said. I knew that my uncle had joined the Army right out of high school. He'd picked up his interest in photography after the war. Nope. My dad's family was different, though, right? Dr. Berger always told me there wasn't any shame in asking questions, that I was allowed to know my own history. More well off or something? My uncle took a while to answer. Not a lot more. They were all immigrants, your grandparents. Your dad didn't finish until after the war. Right then, I realized that my uncle spoke of my father only when I did. I'd never admitted that to myself before. I think something happened to my father during the war, I said quickly, before he could flee the subject. Something traumatic. Something that's always spooked him. Dr. Berger said rape was like that. It could crawl inside your bloodstream and stay there like a virus if you tried to ignore it. Could be, he said. He took a last draw on his cigarette, then stubbed it out. Hey, are there more napkins in that bag? As we finished our sandwiches, I felt my chest balloon with a dismal, broken love for my father. Okay, young fella, hand me the bag with the lenses, Ben said. I felt relief to hear him use that old endearment. I reached around for the zippered tote I'd been carrying, and my heart lurched. The bag felt light. I prayed I'd packed everything correctly. How's it going with the lady shrink, he said, as he rummaged through the tote for the right lens and, thank you God, found it. I exhaled. Okay, I guess. I'd stopped seeing Dr. Berger when Gabe and I got married. What does she have to say about your new husband? So there it was. I didn't answer. It was the kind of question that didn't expect an answer, for one thing. The lights dimmed, then a darkness that smelled like popcorn settled softly around us. Showtime, kiddo, my uncle whispered. He slipped the worn camera strap over his head and flattened himself to his belly and elbows. He brought the viewfinder up to his face 2 or 3 times and made some adjustments, grunting as he shifted position and tried to get comfortable. Far below us, the ringmaster in his top hat and tails was welcoming the crowd to the greatest show on earth. Did my father get hurt in the war? Did he hurt someone else? Even as I asked the questions, I knew they weren't the right questions. I was trying to provoke my uncle, trying to make him jealous. I was angry. He was angry too. Without taking his eye away from the camera, and in a voice I'd never heard him use before, he said, "Not in the war, Izzy. After the war. One goddamned rainy night. Yeah, your father did hurt someone else." In the pitch black of the stadium, my world went hot and soundless. I could feel the blood pound inside my head. My limbs were jelly. One goddamned rainy night. I pictured the street in front of my childhood home with sickening clarity. I knew, in that moment, I knew that I was finally hearing the truth about my mother's death. My father was the one responsible. His car was the car that ran her down, not a stranger in a stranger's car. I knew with as much certainty as if I'd always known, as if I'd witnessed the act myself. There was a rustle of movement close by us, then the spotlight found an opening not more than 20 feet from where Ben and I lay in wait. What I saw next was the wire walker's pointed toe in a soft ballet shoe. Then his slight frame entered the spotlight, 10 fingers curved over a long pole. Below us, the audience cheered, and Uncle Ben muttered, "Fuck." He'd got it wrong. The wire walker wouldn't be walking toward us, but away from us. I felt miserably vindicated. We were on the wrong side. I tried to push my uncle to the margins of my life after that night. I was busy. At first, I was busy nursing my outrage against him for the way he revealed the truth about my mother's death. Eventually, though, I moved on to distribute the rage. I polished and repolished my anger toward my father, that deceiver and wrongdoer, with the same ferocious dedication. My mother was lost to me during the next few years of anger and self-pity. Gabe was too. By the time my life began to move forward again, he and I were divorced. The series of photographs Ben took at the circus that night, the wire walker getting tinier and tinier as he disappeared into the distant black, appeared the following weekend in a newspaper supplement. It was almost summer by the time I picked up the phone to return my uncle's calls. My mother was still dead. Thank you. Thank you.